to Hotel Bar Sessions, the podcast where three philosophers sit down at the end of a long conference day to chop it up at the hotel bar, which, as we all know, is where the real philosophy happens. Welcome back to another episode of Hotel Bar Sessions. My name is Lee Johnson, and I'm joined by my fabulous co-hosts, Rick Lee and Talia Mae Betcher. And today, we are going to be talking about the university. But before we get into that, I want to go around the horn and get your Barstool confessions and also what you're ordering to drink. So, Talia, let me go to you first.
Thanks, Lee. So I think to drink, I'm just going to have an Arnold Palmer. I'll keep it light and low-key, nothing too fancy. But for my confession, this is a really awkward and true confession. I cry inappropriately. Not only not cry when I could or should, but then I cry at the most absurd things, particularly after I've had a hormone injection. And I'm going to give you the most embarrassing example. You know the TV show South Park, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, there's nothing at all sentimental in South Park. They did a very special Thanksgiving episode in which they had Gobbles, the turkey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that one. And it all had to do with poor Gobbles, the turkey. But you know, it was done South Park style, all ridiculous and everything. Anyway, Gobbles, the turkey made me cry my fucking eyes out. And I was with other people, so I never lived that down.
We got to keep the love for the turkeys. Rick, what about you?
I'm going to have a Modelo Especial, and my Barstool confession is I hate Socrates.
What?
Ooh.
What are you, some kind of like Nietzschean? Oh my God.
No, in fact, I also hate Nietzsche. But first of all, I think he is incredibly annoying.
That's his charm. That's his point.
Look, I don't want to shame anyone's kink, but I'm not into that annoying guy. Like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And that leads into my other point. I think he provides often a bad role model for our students. Third, I'm sick of philosophy operating under the so-called martyrdom of Socrates. I don't like him. I have said in class that I think he's a charlatan and a hack, but this is the first time I'm announcing it publicly. I hate Socrates.
Boo, heretic, heretic, heretic.
Lee, what about you? What are you drinking and what's your confession?
I think I'm just going to have an iced tea today. I confess that I am absolutely addicted to those lawn mowing videos.
Oh.
What are those?
There's a subset of videos that show up on TikTok or Reels or Shorts, whichever one you watch, that basically I find extremely therapeutic. And they're things like people mowing an overgrown lawn or cleaning a rug or other things like this. And it doesn't sound like it would be captivating viewing, but it's weirdly relaxing, and the transition from total disorder or total filthiness to cleanliness and order, I just find like truly satisfying. And I finally am just willing to admit that this is an actual addiction of mine, that like I actually can feel like the tension in my shoulders release when I'm watching these. It's so calming.
It can be fulfilling. I can imagine that. How do you feel about shaving videos?
I've never watched any shaving
You
videos,
might try it.
but
I
I
don't
can
know.
imagine it would have the same thing, the same effect. Yeah. All right. We are today talking about our good friend, the university, that is in some deeply, deeply, deeply hot water right now. So, Rick, how's this conversation going to go?
Well, Lee, as you just mentioned, today here in the U.S., but also in other places around the world, universities are under threat. Funding has been cut in many places, and this isn't a new thing. Funding has been being cut for the last, 20 years or so.
Yeah.
And authoritarian-minded regimes have come to see universities as a danger to their rule. But what is it about universities that seems to make them threatening? What, in fact, is a university for? To train workers? To teach critical thinking? To engage in scientific and other practical research? We on the podcast have frequently also been critical of the current state of universities, particularly in the U.S., mostly because today they are fairly closely aligned with capital and its interests. But if that's how they are now, and we've criticized that enough, let's talk about what they should be. Do universities and the staff, students, and faculty who make them up owe something to society? And if they do, maybe society owes something to universities. And by the way, why should a group of people be paid a reasonable salary or a relatively reasonable salary for what seems often like no contribution to the economic output of a nation? And while we're talking about salaries, what does the increasing adjunctification of the university do to its mission? Today, we hope to get to the bottom of what a university is and should be, and hopefully help start the resistance against their annihilation. On several episodes in the past, Lee has referred to universities becoming increasingly vo-tech schools. I think today in the US, a lot of people go to college because they think it's what they need to do in order to get a job. And I think there's a lot of increase in really practical majors. At Penn State, for example, there was a hotel management major. At DePaul, a real estate major, or one of my favorites, a major in entrepreneurship. I think they don't know what that word means. Okay, so it seems universities are becoming something like vocational technical schools. But I want to know, is that what a university should be?
I mean, that's a really interesting question, because one of the things that happens, Rick, that I found is that when you're in a discipline that does not seem to be vocational, there's increasing pressure to sell it as if it was vocational. So particularly when I chaired the philosophy department, I found myself having to sell it to students as this is how it will help you get a job.
Right.
So I focused on various different outcomes, and I got pretty good at it. I had a spiel down. In today's world, you're not going to have the same job over time. You're going to have multiple jobs. And what you need are these transferable, exportable skills. Well, what better way to do this in philosophy? Blah, 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 blah. And all of this is true.
Yeah.
You can make that case. But I always felt dirty doing it. I felt like I was selling out. I mean, I was doing it because I needed to do it to bring in the students and to help our department thrive or survive, as one needs to do as a steward of the department. But there is something deeply perverted about trying to sell philosophy as vocational in that sense.
Well, I know I went into it for the money.
How's that working out for you?
Yeah, exactly. There's a philosophy factory opening up just down the way.
Well, I want to jump in here first to say that I have no problem with vo-tech schools. Vo-tech schools are fine and they're good and we need them. I just think increasingly it's become the case that we've imposed this kind of one uniform model onto all majors at a university. And as Rick seems to be, I think, suggesting, that model is to produce certain kinds of trained workers, right? To train the future workforce. And I think universities should train the future workforce. This one model is not the best model for thinking about what the future workforce should be, because I also think that one of the jobs of the university is to train the future citizenry.
Yeah.
So I don't have any problem with vo-tech education. If you're getting basically a vocational or a technical degree, it absolutely should not be this expensive. But again, if you're getting a degree at all, it shouldn't be this expensive. So that's an entirely separate issue. But I want to highly recommend a book that I read, I guess maybe last year, maybe it was a couple of years ago, but it's called Dark Academia. And the subtitle is How Universities Die. It's by this guy, Australian guy named Peter Fleming. It's an absolutely fantastic book. And it's really aimed at talking about a lot of the things that I think we're going to talk about today, about how it is the case that neoliberalism has taken over universities and universities have adopted business models and that they're emphasizing profitability and efficiency over academic freedom, and they're obsessed with measuring things by visibility and impact metrics, and students have become consumers, blah, 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 all the same things that we constantly hear about universities. But I saw an interview with him after the book came out, someone asking him, are universities worth saving? And he said, Well, we don't really get to decide that, do we?
I agree with that.
We've come to the point now in the model of the university where the main contributors, the main constituents, the main stakeholders of the university are not making decisions about its direction or future.
And that's really scary. I mean, it's too bad that the people who are now charting its course are the people who should not be charting its course. And it's unclear to me how this happened, but the loss of faculty control over the university and input into it, the loss of at least shared governance, but I would say like leadership, is astonishing, because I think there was a time in which faculty had much more input into what the university was and what it was supposed to do. You know how they say, like, a pride of lions? I like to refer to administrators as a metastasis of administrators. They proliferate. They're an illness that afflicts so many different institutions, but certainly the university. There's way too many of them. They get in the way and are doing things that are just simply making the university unhealthy, in my opinion.
I think that a lot of this shift in the university goes back to something we talked about at the beginning of the season, namely the way in which assessment has intervened in higher education. I talked in that episode about how we assess departments and courses and so on the basis of outcomes. Well, that's like a factory model. How many widgets did you make today? You know, could you make more widgets? And if you make more widgets, you get more money and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying there are no outcomes in philosophy, but what I'm saying is, A, we're not sure what they are, and B, we're not sure how we achieve them. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. Right after planes crashed into the World Trade Center on September 11th, the next day I got an email from a former student who was working in New York and had offices in that building and was evacuated. And while he was walking up the street, the first tower collapsed. And he said in the email, I don't know why, I can't point to anything, but I thought the only thing I have to fall back on right now is your class in medieval philosophy. I mean, of all things, medieval philosophy, what does that have to do with an attack on Commerce Center of the United States and the Pentagon? Had I set out in that class to help people prepare to deal with tragic situations, I don't think I would have met that outcome. And I'm not sure how I did, but I'm really damn sure that philosophy does it. And so I worry about the way in which this model taken from business comes into the university and changes fundamentally what it is a university does and how what a university does and its success is measured, if at all.
I'm trying to remember the philosopher. I think it was Walzer. This idea of different spheres of values, where you have economic values, but you also have different sorts of values. So you're going to have values pertaining to health, or you're going to have values pertaining to education. And they operate differently. They're not the same values. And what seems to be the problem is that economic values are taking over all the other values and converting them into economic values. But educational values are not the same thing as economic values. If you start looking at education in terms of a consumer model, you've just completely destroyed the way that we ought to look at education. I think it's a general problem. I think that it's related to what has happened to healthcare.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a business model. And, you know, when it comes to providing health to people, it shouldn't be a business model.
I think one of the reasons that we fall back on these kind of uniform assessment models, which, by the way, I want to say I'm not entirely convinced that they're business models. I think we can point the finger at the social sciences as much in terms of where these models came from. But at any rate, I think the reason that we fall back on uniform models and ignore, as Talia was saying, these different spheres of value or different kinds of value systems is because there is an argument that within universities, different areas of study are incredibly siloed. And I wonder if the siloing of the university, which is often used as a justification for the bloated administrative structure of universities. I wonder if it's the cause of that bloated administrative structure, like we need all these administrators because departments are so siloed in the university, or whether or not the cause and effect is reversed there. That as we've gotten a more and more bloated administration, departments become more and more siloed. And I think this is really detrimental to the university, because the best way to move forward as a university that has a kind of identity is for the instructors, the professors, to understand what the others are doing. And that doesn't mean, you have to know all the details of particle physics or anything else. It just simply means I have a general sense of the constellation of values that are at work in your field. You have a general sense of the constellation of values at work in my field, and we can respect those differences and not feel like we have to impose them on one another.
And this is a really interesting, I think, and subtle point, Lee. These two mechanisms interact with each other, but I do see them as independent. So I think that one of the reasons for siloing has to do, obviously, with the increased specializations that we see in all of the disciplines. And I think that kind of happens on its own. And then I think that when it comes to administration, they just have a tendency to metastasize and invent stuff like, we got to justify our existence. Oh my God, let's make something up for faculty to do. We need a new position to help monitor what faculty are doing. So I do see administrators as like malignant cells who just keep reproducing and reproducing and reproducing new administrators on their own. This is kind of what they do. I think that sometimes there's an overlap, but not necessarily a complete fit there. The whole idea of general education in the United States was introduced precisely because of this increase in specialization. And I do really strongly believe in this notion of general education. I think it's super important. It's one of the things that is really also dying and being pushed out along with the humanities right now. Again, from these two sides that we're talking about, both capitalism and the angry right, the authoritarian right, that balks at this idea of a general education that is going to require this sort of reflection, the stepping back and the looking at the ways these different things operate together. I think it's tremendously important, and is interesting because you're going to find that these disciplines, particularly in the humanities and the social sciences, are really well suited to doing that kind of general education work.
The origin of the university in medieval Europe proves this point directly. When you started at a university in the Middle Ages, you didn't get a degree, or you did, but it was a bachelor's of liberal arts, and everyone studied the liberal arts. So that would be music and arithmetic and logic and grammar and what we today call humanities in general. History wouldn't have been included. But it wasn't until you wanted to go on and specialize that you would get an advanced degree. And so there was a general recognition that we need to have this broad-based general education that would be, if not necessary, at least incredibly helpful for your pursuit of one of the higher faculties, they were called. The higher faculties originally were only three: medicine, law, and theology. But you needed this broad-based education in liberal arts, including philosophy, by the way, in order to then go on and specialize even in medicine. And I think we've lost sight of the purpose of that general education, as you were just pointing out, Talia. And I think we have not done a good enough job in defending the relationship between a general education and some specialization.
I would also add a general education is important in and of itself for its own right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find so frustrating, and I think is one of the most important things, is always, what is the instrumental value? What does it get you? I mean, why can't it be valuable in and of itself? You'd have to justify it in terms of, oh, it helps you with this specialization. Oh, it helps you get a job. I mean, to me, in the end, if there is any kind of justification at all, is it makes you a better human being. It makes you a deeper, better human being. It contributes to the richness of your life. That's not instrumental, I don't think, in the same kind of way. And that's what I see these humanities and the arts and these liberal arts for. But that doesn't fit into the capitalist model of, oh, you need a job, we need to be consumers and we need to be workers. But whatever happened to, I want to be a good human being. I want to live a good and rich life.
Right.
Period. Full stop. That's not a value, but it ought to be the value. Until it is the value, we've lost sight of what makes it valuable.
I'm increasingly pessimistic about our capacity to get that sense back if we ever had
I
it.
agree.
Largely because students that come into colleges and universities now have spent the first 18 years of their life with only one understanding of education, that it's transactional, that it's instrumental. And that would mean entirely retraining them as learners when they arrive at university and college. Now, I think that's fine. I think we could do that, but it would have to be a conscientious effort to do that. I feel like I do that in my classes. You know, when I teach intro level classes, I spend a lot of time saying, this is not high school. This is not grade school. This is a different thing that we're doing now. And here are the ways that it's different. This is the way that you should think about the value of this new model. But it's just so hard to untrain someone.
I agree. I mean, in articulating this vision, this is an ideal for me. This is the way it ought to be or should be. But I rarely think in terms of that. I mean, for me, I'm very grounded in what's actually the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm far more pessimistic than you are. I think we're so far off base in terms of this that we don't have a snowball's hope in hell of achieving this. If these values are to survive, it actually won't be in the university.
I think one problem that can't be overlooked, though, is that old model is relatively easy to achieve when university education is relatively elite. Mm-hmm. That is, the smaller the student bodies are, the less funding it takes to run a university and so on, because also the elite don't have the same job pressures as like regular people. Once universities expanded their student populations, and a lot of people point to the introduction of the GI Bill in the United States for this, that made this kind of education a little bit more difficult to accomplish with the same funding structures. And so now you have universities having to raise money, and they do this by going to their alumni. They can raise money from their alumni if they have well-known sports teams, and they can attract rich alumni if they have remarkable gyms and so on and so forth. And so the challenge is, and I'm also pessimistic, but I think the challenge is how to deliver what is an elite education to non-elites.
I mean, I sort of agree with this and sort of disagree, Rick, because I teach at Cal State LA. And one of the great things that I believe in at Cal State LA is it's always number one or close to number one in the nation at upward student mobility. And so it's a great engine in the nation and in California. And it does a lot of good work. We have a lot of first-generation students. We have a lot of students who are coming from working-class economic backgrounds. And there's a lot of pressure, however, to make Cal State LA as vocational as possible.
Right.
And a lot of pressure against stuff like arts and humanities. There's always a kind of racism and a classism built into that. There was a chancellor, I can't remember his name, of the CSU system, who referred to the students of the UCs as the show horses and of the CSUs as the workhorses. And he meant this as a compliment, but it came off really backhanded. Why can't students from a disadvantaged background get access to the education that is going to open a world to them of music, of mathematics, of literature? You know, here's ways in which you can enrich your life, in which you can become a better human being.
That was my
point, in a deep
though.
sense. Right, exactly. No, I don't think that everyone in the world, though, is going to choose that. So I don't think that it needs to be for everyone or that everyone needs to be forced into it.
Right.
But somehow, some way, it needs to be made available through fellowship, through scholarships, or just simply through universal education. Thank you very much.
I want to redouble that last point because I feel like it's very important to say college is not for everyone, and it shouldn't be for everyone. Not all of us are going to live the same kind of lives. We don't want the same things out of our lives. We don't want the same things out of our futures. And we have, for the last 20, 25 years, probably longer, been pushing this model that the thing that you do after high school is you go to college. I think that's a terrible, terrible, terrible model to press on young people, not just because of the enormous expense of it, because, I mean, it certainly at this point is not a good investment to go to college, but also because it doesn't mean that the people who are there because they want to be there or even know why that they're there. They're there because that's just the next thing to do. And I say to my students all the time in intro classes, if you're bored or if you're confused, if you don't know why you're here, stop now, quit, take a year off and see if you want to actually come back, because this is a very expensive experiment to engage in.
Right.
You know, you're wasting your time, you're wasting everyone else's time, you're miserable, and you're getting in debt while all of this is happening. You don't have to be here. There are other ways to move forward in your life in a way that whatever seems successful to you in your life that don't involve college. And that's why I don't think the problem with college is that, I mean, it is, of course, still the case that it is harder for people from disadvantaged backgrounds to get into college or to go to college. But I don't think our main problem right now is that we're educating the elite. I think our main problem right now is that we've said everybody needs to get this college education without saying anything else, without saying the why of it, so that some people could say, oh, well, that's not me.
Yes, my initial point was we are not teaching the elite any longer, but we are also, and this brings in Talia's point, we are also not offering the students we are teaching an elite education.
Exactly. We're not teaching anybody, in a certain sense, what we're supposed to be teaching them.
Right.
Not really.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think that's an exaggeration. I think there's a lot of really good work being done in colleges and universities. I think the structure of the university makes it more difficult now, and it seems to be getting more difficult as the years go by.
I think I'm just bitter and jaded.
Hey there, listeners, it's Lee. If you've been listening for a while, congratulations on your excellent taste. But if you're a new listener, let me be the first to tell you that Hotel Bar Sessions isn't just a podcast. It's a whole community, and we want you to be a part of it. Here's how. Bookmark our website at www.hotelbarpodcast.com. That's where you'll find past episodes, show notes, news and updates, and probably all the things that are going to get us reported to the current administration's ideology police. If that doesn't scare you, and it probably should, we're on Blue Sky, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Just search for Hotel Bar Sessions Podcast and you'll find us. And honestly, we need you there. Otherwise, it's just the three of us here yelling into the void every week, and trust me, we do that enough already. Following us on social media is easy, free, and scientifically proven to make you hotter, smarter, and better at small talk. Okay, scientifically proven might be a stretch, but you get the point. So here's the bottom line. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, hell, tell your bartender about Hotel Bar Sessions Podcast. This conversation's way too good to keep to yourself. All right, the break's almost over, but seriously, follow us, fight us, flirt with us, just don't forget about us. And now back to the conversation.
I wonder if one of the reasons why all three of us are pessimistic is because those who are on the left, so progressives, communists, socialists, are highly critical of the current state of the university, but so also are those on the right. We've already talked a bit about some of the concerns we all have about the current state of the university, but I wonder if we could hit that a little bit harder. And I want to come back to this explosion of administration. One of the problems is that there is now an educational track in administration. That is, there are people who, they get an undergraduate degree in administration, they get an advanced degree in administration, and they enter the university as administrators. Many of them have never been faculty, but also as administrators, they have neither the interests of the faculty nor of the students as their own interest. They form, to use Marxist language, therefore, a class unto themselves with their own class interests, which are antithetical often, certainly to the interests of the faculty, but frequently to the interests of students. And I think about the antithesis between administrative interests and student interests in relation to the clampdown on protests against the Israeli invasion of Gaza. There, the administrators clearly had someone else's interest in mind, not the interests of students nor of faculty.
I think this point about administrators constituting their own class is a really important point, as is the point that many of these administrators don't really have academic backgrounds. They're hired as managers, really.
Right.
And I want to note, as much as this kind of pains me to note this, I do want to note that being an academic does not by itself make you a good administrator. Right. So I can see the need for a kind of managerial force inside of a university just because it's a big, complex operation. And, not everybody, most academics, I think, probably don't make good administrators. But as we said in the previous segment, the administrative arm of the university has been bloated, and its attentions, as you noted, are towards, really the donors and the board, maybe in some cases, depending on the institution, state legislatures and things like that. I'm not so sure that we can really blame, let me take that back because I don't know that I want to say that. I'm not so sure that we can really blame everything that's wrong about the university right now on administration, although I do think a lot of it can be blamed on the administration. But I do think this particular thing that has been happening over the last, say, 6 to 8 months, the crackdown on protests on university campuses, that is evidence of a problem that I think is entirely because of the fact that administrators are themselves not faculty. Many of them weren't previously faculty, and also don't have the same understanding of what the function of the university is. To me, a university that doesn't have protests is not a student body. I mean, it's not
it's
a
the job
university.
of students.
Right.
I don't agree with that necessarily, Lee. I mean, I think that it's certainly true that there are those administrators who were never faculty, and that certainly those are ill-equipped, in my opinion, to administrate a university because you need that experience. And I also agree that not all faculty are cut out to be administrators. I should also go on the record as saying I don't loathe all administrators. There's some I adore, some I love, because they're really freaking good. And they bring with them the experience that they had as faculty and their passion for teaching and their love of students. And they never lose their values. And somehow they have the political savvy to not get fired, despite the fact that they have these values. I don't know how they do it. It's masterful.
Yeah.
They're rare. But I also think I've seen faculty become administrators and then totally sell out their values if they've ever had them. So I don't think that it's necessarily the administrative class of those who have never been faculty. I think that there are those who have been faculty who have also, as it were, become administrators and sold out their values. And so I wouldn't put that on a certain subset of administrators that's clamped down on student protests. But I do think that we've somehow entered this phase where certain sorts of protests, and I think it's only certain sorts of protests, right? I mean, if this were a different sort of protest, if it weren't for Palestinians and Gaza, I don't know, maybe it would be different. It depends. It depends on the political situation and just how volatile it is, because I think that this one is so volatile and so tricky politically that they just don't want the controversy. Of course, that's where you really need, in the university, you need it, where you need the protests and where you need the kind of action actually happening.
Well, I anticipate that what the actual nature of the relationship between university administrations and student protests is, what the actual nature of that relationship is going to be tested this fall. Because I think what we're going to see on campuses this fall is many, many, many more right-wing protests. And we're going to see if the way that they're treated is different.
And I think that if there are right-wing protests, that they should be allowed on campus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Of course they should.
Well, actually, I want to back this up for just 1 second. I also think in principle, right-wing protests should be allowed. But now I'm thinking, if there was a protest on a campus that was something to the effect of like what the Westboro Baptist Church does, you know what I'm talking about? This
fags burn in hell.
Super anti-gay. Yeah, exactly. If there was something like that on campus, I don't know. That's a different sort of thing, right? I mean, I think one of the problems with the way that the pro-Palestinian protests were characterized by the right is that they were anti-Semitic. I mean, and the ones that I saw, I don't think that they were. That is not to say that there weren't anti-Semites in the crowd. There are anti-Semites in every crowd. There are Nazis in every crowd. There are homophobes and sexists in every crowd. I hope there are communists in every crowd, but there probably is. But at any rate.
Certainly anarchists in every crowd. Yeah.
Right, right. So if the pro-Palestinian protests were actually anti-Jew protests, not anti-Israel,
Right.
but openly anti-Semitic protests, I would have a problem with that. So that's my comparison to the Westboro Baptist Church. But again, in principle, I think that people from different ideological positions should be able to protest things that are important to them.
It gets really tricky, though. I used to be more of the opinion that you are. So one thing about what's going on, I think, on this issue of whether or not it's anti-Semitic, what I've learned is that sometimes there's this issue around the word Zionism and what Zionism means.
Yeah.
And if someone is anti-Zionist, that can be interpreted as anti-Semitic because Zionism has multiple meanings. To those who are pro-Palestinian, the word Zionist means one thing, and I think that those who are pro-Israel, Zionism means something different. And so I think that when you say that you're anti-Zionist, it can come off to someone who is pro-Israel as an anti-Semitic slur, when it's not necessarily intended as one in the mouth of someone who is pro-Palestinian.
One difficulty, though, is that the need of a protest is to engage people, give a message as quickly as possible as cars are driving by or students are walking through the quad and so on. And that often is antithetical to nuanced discussion and dialogue. Mm-hmm. I have in mind the slogan, "From the river to the sea."
I was just thinking that myself, yeah.
There's a way in which that could be heard as saying Jews have no business living in this territory at all.
Right.
Now, if I stopped and talked to the students who were in the encampment and said, hey, what do you mean by this? They would say, okay, you're forgetting that Palestine should be free. That is not let's annihilate a certain group of people, but let's all live here in freedom together. Now, that's hard to communicate in, a terse poster or a chant as you're walking around campus. And I think that many universities, and I'll throw my university under the bus here too, because horrifically they called the police and the encampment was violently destroyed. I don't know if there were any arrests. I'm sorry, I should know that, but it was violently destroyed. And I think we gave up the very mission of a university there to have a teachable moment, to model what a free inquiry looks like. How do we get to the bottom of this? How do we bring in discussions of fact alongside discussions of value? Value, to go back to Talia's point, is something that universities both do best, and we're now doing it less and less and less. That is, we're teaching discussions about values much less because of this outcomes-based initiative. And I think because of that, we lost the university moment in these protests by just collapsing them and destroying them.
Yeah, I agree as well. I want to back up from the protests in particular for just a second to address two other things. And one of them is, to what extent should universities operate like an independent state? Like the police shouldn't come in and ICE shouldn't come in. They ought to be safe havens, just to use the vernacular of the moment, sanctuaries. That's one thing. But that point is related to this other point, which is, to what extent should the state, whether it's the federal government or state governments or even more local than that, have any say whatsoever in the educational programs of the universities? And here, obviously, I'm referring to Trump's threats to withdraw funding from universities that don't eliminate DEI programs. And I think that's just the start of it, right?
Sure,
I think there's going to be more ideological benchmarks that have to be met in order to receive funding or not be harassed in some other kind of way by the federal government or by the Trump administration. Yeah, so those two questions. One is, how much should a university be an ideological sanctuary? And secondly, how much should it be a literal person's sanctuary?
There is an old tradition in universities, again, going back to the Middle Ages, that the means of state law enforcement are not allowed on campus and that the campus will police itself. And that was in a time when either in most universities, it was a guild of masters, that is the faculty, and they ran the university, they made the rules and the laws. Or, as it was in Italy, a guild of students who made the rules and passed the laws and therefore enforced them. So there was this autonomy going on for a long time. By the way, there was also so-called town and gown issues, to the point at which the faculty at the University of Paris had to pass a law saying that students were no longer allowed to wear swords off campus, which is still in effect, I think. Now, I can see some problems with that. Obviously, in cases where people's lives are in danger or they're being threatened, I think, at least our campus security is not in any means equipped to deal with something like that. And so I want to have that autonomy in that sense protected, but not so sacrosanct.
Can I just add one other problem to the ones that you brought up as well, which is that the model of let the university handle its own business is one of the reasons why we had so many unprosecuted sexual assaults on campus for so long.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not a hardliner on this issue either. I do think in general that universities ought to be sanctuaries and ought to, for the most part, be protected from unnecessary invasions by outside law enforcement, and just kind of use Rick's model here. But we also have to recognize that when you say this is a clubhouse and the clubhouse has its own rules and we're going to handle our own business, that what handling our own business looks like often is just sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And what I was thinking is, it seems like Rick's original idea is in these cases in which members of the university community, so students, faculty, staff, administrators, when their lives are in jeopardy, when they're threatened with violence, sexual violence included, then in those cases, for their welfare, it would be appropriate to bring in outside resources, just as it would be appropriate to bring in medical care, bring in an ambulance.
Right. Exactly.
Right? However, when it comes to something like ICE, what the fuck are they doing there?
Right.
That's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not there for the welfare to help with the life of a member of the community.
Exactly.
Now, someone can start slicing and dicing and say, oh, we're coming in because we're worried about our students being brainwashed by radical gender ideology extremism. And so we're coming in to protect the students. And so there's ways in which that line can be futzed with. But I do think that in general, the principle is there about when and when not we might want to bring outside entities in and have their involvement.
I mean, can we just try to put a fucking stake in the heart of this indoctrination question? Because I have never been on a university campus in which there was like a Clockwork Orange situation going on.
You should come to my class. That's what I do. They tie them all, and it's like, you have to look at all these
eyes forced
people.
open.
Yeah. And then before they leave, I force everyone to have surgery.
Paid for by the university.
Yeah.
Or the taxpayers.
Or if they don't want that, I turn them into furries and give them litter boxes.
So I raise that to say that part of the other kind of sanctuary that Lee was pointing to requires that we say there is a difference between physical bodily harm and thoughts. Now, I know then the difficulty comes in with language, which I think can do often physical harm. But I want to put my foot down on this indoctrination business because I think that when I teach students Thomas Aquinas, I'm not indoctrinating them. I am telling them, hey, this is what Aquinas said. Here are 5 proofs for the existence of God. Let's learn them. What do you think about them? Are they valid? Are they invalid? Are they sound? Are they not sound? That's not indoctrination. And so I think that there's a way in which we have to let thinking happen and not people are being harmed by learning that gender is performative.
This issue is a lot stickier than it appears.
It is sticky.
I think that it's obviously the case that most of us are not I don't think anyone really is indoctrinating students because I don't think students are that stupid,
Right.
but also because that's not really in the interest of most intellectuals to do that. Now, that is not to say that when I teach that there are some values that I'm teaching and that I'm teaching as not having two legitimate sides. So I am telling students there are no superior and inferior races. There are no superior and inferior genders. There are ugly parts of American history and, there are ugly parts of the history of the West. There are real problems with capitalism. I think that those are facts and also values. And I don't think that I would call that indoctrination.
Right.
But that is what I think that people are pointing to when they say they're getting this gender ideology or they're getting this anti-white ideology or whatever. White students are being made to feel bad about themselves. That's what they're pointing to when they are saying indoctrination. And I suppose I can see that. I suppose I can see that being described as a kind of indoctrination. And if it is, then yeah, okay, that I am doing that. I am indoctrinating students to, I think, be better moral agents and citizens. It's just a messy mess that we have here.
But you're also not opposed to waterboarding students.
Would you stop?
Rick, I'm going to resurrect Socrates. Sorry.
That's okay.
It must be so.
Yeah, exactly. It must be so. But I mean, he was accused of corrupting the youth for teaching against the old gods and introducing these new gods.
Right.
And there just seems to be a parallel here. We're challenging old values and proposing new values, new ways of looking at things, introducing new ways of looking at things. So I do think that the metaphor, Socrates' metaphor, is actually worthwhile here in thinking about what it is that we might be doing and why it is that society might not like it very much. We're more than annoying, we're threatening.
I also think it's really important for the general public, the non-academic public, to understand that there is, in fact, quite a bit of ideological diversity in university faculty.
For sure.
This idea that everyone is a kind of left-leaning, communist, liberal, or whatever is just quite simply not true. But when we get down to some very basic things, like, for example, in my classes, I have certain rules about what constitutes respecting your classmates in a conversation in the environment of the classroom. And those are rules. They're rules in my classroom. And so if you wanted to call that indoctrination, fine, call it indoctrination. But you know what? They're in my classroom 3 hours a week.
Right.
And another 3 hours, they're in a different classroom that has different rules and different values, and that is indoctrinating in different kinds of ways. So, I mean, the idea that indoctrination is going on at the university is more than a little bit absurd because of the fact that it's not as if all the students are sitting in one class with one professor delivering one doctrine for the whole 4 years that they're there.
It also depends on a model of the student that I rarely, if ever, see. Namely, this is an individual who is so devoted to their university studies that they are just reading books and attending lectures and working on papers, and they are not watching movies or TikTok or on social media or, reading the newspaper and so on. Of course, all of that is as indoctrinating as anything else. And so we are a small part of a larger culture, a larger set of impacts and values that we're often struggling against as much as they are struggling against us.
To go back to this point about ideology and to what extent what we do might be represented as inculcating ideology. And I don't think that all of it ought to be. If you have rules in your classroom or you're starting from particular assumptions or a set of assumptions, because I think that it's just the case that what students learn is methodologically, whenever you start with a set of starting points. And I start with different starting points depending upon what type of course I'm teaching.
Right.
The example I like to give is if I'm offering a senior class, upper division class in a major, say in philosophy of sex, and we're talking about same-sex sexuality, we're not going to entertain the question, is it moral or not? It's going to be assumed that that's like a non-issue.
Right.
And so if someone raises that as an issue, it's like, well, the starting point is that that's not a thing we're considering now as even having value or being worth asking. However, I still to this day, and every year I ask whether or not I should do it, and every year I decide I should, and every year I'm vindicated in deciding to do it. When I teach a lower division course where we talk about same-sex sexuality, I start with arguments that same-sex sexuality is immoral, and I knock down all the arguments, and I show why those arguments fail.
Uh-huh.
And I do a little dance positioning, like why it's problematic for me to even take up this argument. But I do it. And I do it because a lot of queer students find value in that, actually. Or a lot of students who have parents who have these moral views about same-sex sexuality find it valuable so then they can talk to their parents. But it's a different point. You have different starting points. It's just normal that any kind of course is going to have its starting points. In any investigation, you're going to have your starting points. That's just the way it goes.
Right.
And in any class, you're going to have your rules for investigation. But I don't think that's ideological. I don't think that's inculcation. I think that's methodological. Now, some of the stuff that Lee was talking about are facts. Like if you're going to be teaching, like, here's American history, here is in point of fact what actually happened. That's a fact. That's not a starting point. That just is a fact. And so in some of these cases, you can't blow it off as methodological. But I mean, like, sometimes you got to teach people the truth about such and such actually did happen.
I think that most people who would accuse the faculty of being left-wing ideologues or whatever, or indoctrinating students into some kind of left-wing ideology, would be fine with stipulating, yeah, of course it's the case that in any class there's going to be starting points and we're all going to have to start on the same page and there are going to be certain rules and people are going to have to follow them or drop the class or take another class or whatever. But I think that they would point to some very specific things, none of which are ones that we've brought up as examples of what might be considered indoctrination. I think they would point to, let's just pick the most obvious one, being required to call people by their preferred pronouns. Mm-hmm. That is going to be something that a parent is going to say, this is indoctrination. My student can't choose not to do this, even though they don't believe it. They're being made to do something that they believe is false or is a lie or that is harmful in some way. They're being made to do it, and their only choice is to fail or drop the class. That's their only other option. And, maybe this is a required course or something. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the only class that fits in their schedule, whatever. I think that's what they're going to be pointing to, those kinds of things. Or that you can't use certain racial slurs in a classroom. You know what I'm saying? Like those sorts of things.
No, exactly. But I think that falls within the parameters of what we've outlined, specifically in terms of rules. Mm-hmm. We need to have the instructor, the professor, be able to set the rules and determine what constitutes and what doesn't constitute respect. And if they don't like it, tough. I don't think that that's indoctrination. And a lot of times in life, you have to play by a set of rules that you don't believe in.
Of course.
That's called being an adult.
Right.
A lot of times I have to go along with shit I don't believe in. And I suck it up and I go through it. I put on my big girl pants and there it is. So guess what? You're going to go through this class. You're going to suck it up. You're going to follow the rules. And then you'll have learned something.
Or alternatively, you're going to protest the rules, but you're going to have to make a good argument for your protest. You're going to have to present your case. It's going to have to be compelling. And if it's not compelling enough to change things, then you're going to have to go back and revisit your own values.
Exactly.
And, and if you're still unhappy, I agree with you. Maybe university or maybe that classroom is not the place for you. But I suppose what I'm really trying to just point out here is that it's not impossible for me to understand the indoctrination point because, Rick started this by saying, let's just put a stake in the heart of this question. This doesn't happen. Maybe it kind of does if we sort of look at it slantways, but I do think that it doesn't happen in the way that it is often reported as happening.
I have so many things to say here, but the first is to go back to something you raised earlier, Lee. We are not teaching 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
The people in our classes are at least 18 and often older than that. If they come at, the regular age, if they've progressed through school, then 18 to 22-year-olds, these are young adults. We should treat them like young adults. And so therefore, when someone says, I prefer to be called Rick, they're not going to freak out about that. Why? Because they're adults. And this is... Okay, so they're adults. That's the first point. The second point is that there's a difference between talking about the reality of something and talking about how it is we show respect. And here I agree wholeheartedly with what Talia said, that oftentimes in order for me to respect someone, I have to suck something up and just let it go or let it be or just accept that this is the way they want it. And out of respect, I allow them to do that. I think, for example, if I said to you, my name is Rick, and you keep calling me, Stacy, then at a certain point, I'm like, well, I never felt like a Stacy. You know what? It's not my name.
Yeah.
Right. So stop it. It's disrespectful. And so I think there are a lot of rules about how we can get along together, particularly when we're having a conversation that's investigating values. And so we need to show a respect to one another. We need to listen. I think there all sorts of rules are appropriate that have nothing to do with indoctrination. My last point is I think maybe Stephen Colbert was right. It could just be the case that reality has a well-known left-leaning bias.
I completely agree with that. But I mean, it cuts both ways. You're also going to have other rules in the classroom that protect other people.
Yes.
Right, with different views. You can't make fun of someone's religious beliefs.
Right.
You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And you can't put someone down because they hold a view that you disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't mock someone because they're a Trumper.
Exactly right. Yeah.
You can't call someone a maggot in class, even though you could do so in a podcast. But you can't do it in the classroom.
Hotel Bar Session listeners, this is Rick Lee. Do you know what kind of pillow I use or mattress I sleep on? No, of course you don't. And that's because we don't have any of those stupid ads for pillows or mattresses or any other crap that you don't even want. We are supported by you, our listeners. And if you want to keep our late night conversations flowing, why not do the equivalent of buying us a drink? You could subscribe to our podcast at Patreon. That's patreon.com/hotelbarsessions. And you could subscribe at many levels. Hey, there's perks at those levels. You could get a coffee mug, or I might even call you out on an episode, or you could get early access to some of our episodes. There are lots of perks there, and we could really use your help. So go to patreon.com/hotelbarsessions and subscribe at any level you feel comfortable with. In the meantime, we'll see you back at the bar.
As we're recording this in spring 2025, we are on the heels of the first 100 or so days of Donald Trump's presidency. And in that 100 or so days, there have been a lot of, I think, what we could call attacks on the university, either in the form of executive orders or just threats and coercions. But maybe the biggest one that got pushed forward in the news was Trump's threat to withhold funding from universities that don't basically comply with his version of eliminating DEI. And I say his version of eliminating DEI because the great irony of Trump's assault on DEI is that it's in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right. The very argument for it is what DEI is. But at any rate, we'll leave that aside for the moment. But he has threatened universities that he will withhold funding if they don't, for the most part, eliminate DEI. And the consequence of eliminating DEI is not just that you eliminate the office of DEI or something in your university, but it goes all the way down to specific programs and specific majors. So the first step is no more DEI department, no more DEI rules. But then as you go down, or as this progresses, it becomes no more Indigenous Studies department, no more LGBTQ department or center or major, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are real threats with a purse attached to them that are bending the arm of university administrators behind their back and sort of forcing them to make a decision. Columbia was probably the first big news story because it basically
capitulated.
Yeah, capitulated to Trump's demands. And then only a few weeks later, Harvard came out and said, no, we're not going to play ball. Now, this is going to be very expensive for Harvard, But I think that what universities all across the United States needed, was for an institution like Harvard to be the first one to step out. Because this is going to have to be like every other great protest, like every other great change movement. It's going to have to be a collective movement. It can't be a piecemeal, one university by one university making their own independent decisions about this. I do think that across the nation, there's going to have to be a kind of consensus about whether or not universities are, as I was trying to suggest earlier, sanctuaries.
I think also the mechanism of this interference in universities is both more widespread and deep. So a lot of people may have heard that at the beginning of the administration, the Department of Health and Human Services cut out a lot of what Robert Kennedy, the secretary, said were an alphabet soup of agencies. A lot of cuts were made, for example, to the National Institutes of Health. A lot of the funding of the National Institutes of Health go to universities for biologists to study cancer or diabetes or tuberculosis and so on.
Measles.
And those grants help fund students and build laboratories and, buy beakers and Bunsen burners. The last time I did a science was in high school, so I don't know what goes on in those lab things, but I imagine Bunsen burners and beakers.
Whenever you say Bunsen and Beaker, I keep thinking of the Muppets. I'm sorry.
Right.
Same.
So the tools brought to bear on the very existence of universities are quite extensive and don't get the fanfare, I think, often that these direct executive order threats do. And I can't say strongly enough how offensive it is and how disappointed I am that Columbia capitulated. It's worth saying that one of the importances of a university like Harvard fighting is, first of all, if you ask a run-of-the-mill American, name a university, Harvard's going to be right up there. But secondly, they have deep pockets. And so they can fund the lawyers that it's going to take. And by the way, they have a lot of good lawyers on their faculty. And so I think Harvard's move is really, really crucial.
I think the general public doesn't quite fully appreciate how much free research, how much free knowledge gets done by universities. I mean, it's not, of course, free because we're talking about the funding here, but think about the funding that taxpayer dollars pay these universities. Think about that cost compared to if every single bit of this research were being done by independent corporations. And the products of that research were being sold to you as if they were made by independent corporations. Now, first of all, that means that a lot of this research just quite simply wouldn't get done,
right? Because
it probably wouldn't be profitable. But to the extent that it is profitable, it is going to be dramatically more expensive, right, than anything that we have at the present moment. I really worry sometimes that universities are not their own best PR people. They really don't sell the value of a university.
Yeah.
For all the metrics that we collect, you would think that we'd be better at this.
Right. But we're not collecting the right metrics, and we're terrible PR people. I mean, the kind of research that gets done at a university is just simply not going to get done when it's driven by a corporation. You're doing the kind of work that may be experimental, is not going to take off, but you're going to try it anyway, or that takes a long, sustained effort over many, many years. But it's that kind of thing that is really going to allow something new to blossom that is then going to be seized upon by the corporations and then become profitable.
Your mention of the Sesame Street characters earlier reminded me, or I guess you mentioned the Muppets, but it reminded me of Sesame Street. And I've said to my friends many times, my right-leaning friends, that you could think about universities on the same model as NPR. So NPR gets a little bit of money from the government, but it's mostly supported by its members, by the people who contribute to it, donors. Yes, of course, if the government withdrew all of its money, that would make it much more difficult for us to have something like National Public Radio or National Public Television. But it could possibly survive. But if whatever it is that we get from NPR had to become its own profit-making business, it would close. We just wouldn't have it. And that means we wouldn't have Sesame Street, right? And do you want to live in a world without Sesame Street? Because that is actually what it comes down to. If you say that we're going to use public funding or government funding as a threat to universities to enforce whatever sorts of administrative changes or ideological changes or whatever that we want to make in universities, then universities stop being universities and they just become arms of the state. Or the things that universities do well and only universities do well stops being done altogether.
I mean, one of the things I think that has not been said that just simply needs to be said is that taking over the universities, eliminating the universities, destroying the university functions, that is one of the first opening gambits of an authoritarian regime.
Of course.
It's the first move of fascism. And
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that just needs to be stated explicitly.
It absolutely does.
Yeah, this takes a page right out of the book of Viktor Orban, who looked to previous fascists to learn the lesson he brought to Hungary. I agree wholeheartedly, but it's incredibly short-sighted because for as much as the funding allows people like us to develop critiques of the fascist regime and the relation between capital and politics and so on. Okay, you want to cut that out, but you're also cutting out funding for cancer research or glaucoma or hypertension. The other short-sighted part of this is I know that philosophy provides our students with a whole host of skills that are both practical but also ethical in the sense that they help them live a better life. And that also contributes to society. Sure, it's less easy to measure financially, but I think a society in which people can no longer think about what is the best way for me to live well and what is the best way for us to live well together, that society is going to be not only dangerous, but incredibly expensive in the end.
I agree with you. And I think all the while they're playing this look at the squirrel game, distracting everyone by pointing at the quote unquote elite academics, the quote unquote elite intellectuals, so that people don't actually look at the actual elites.
Of course.
Look at these elite professors that are harming us, harming society, harming the American way of life, harming your children, and not look at the actual elites, the billionaires and the millionaires who are ruining the natural world, who are ruining the social world, and who are making this increasingly an oppressive, bordering on fascist police state.
I don't think that we're a distraction. I think that we're part of it because you want to control education. You want to have a state control of education, K through 12 to like post-secondary, so that you can raise the kind of population that you want. You want a docile, compliant population. So I don't think that we're a distraction. I think that this is the takeover of education so we can have state-controlled education. Talia here from Hotel Bar Sessions. Your weekly reminder that philosophy isn't dead. It's just probably heading on its way to rehab. We've got new episodes dropping all the time, and if you want more than what hits your podcast feed, follow us on YouTube and Facebook. On YouTube, you'll find full episodes, teasers, and bonus clips. And over on Facebook, we're arguing with listeners, posting updates, and generally pretending we have a social media strategy. Just search Hotel Bar Sessions, hit follow, and get ready to watch your favorite loudmouth philosophers talk about everything from Plato to post-apocalypse.
So I'm going to ask you both the same question that was asked of Fleming, the author of Dark Academia, that I mentioned at the top of the episode, namely, is the university worth saving? Do we want to save it?
Well, putting aside the answer that was given, namely, it's not up to us, I'll answer yes. I think it is worth saving, and not just because I want to have a job. I mean, if by my leaving academia I could save it, then I would leave tomorrow. I think it's worth saving if we can insist on and redevelop the notion that we want to educate people so that they could live lives that they find meaningful and valuable. It should win out over everything else. It should win out over getting a certain job certification. It should win out over training you to be an accountant or a real estate agent. It should win out over all of these other values, because I think Aristotle was right here. Living well and living well together are the values that envelop all other values.
I mean, I agree with the answer that it's not up to us. And in light of that, I would further add that given that it's not up to us, that what we have, I think that it's not worth saving. I think that ideally it is, but I think that it would be unrecognizable as the university that we have now. Because I would envision a university that is really geared towards the humanities and the arts and the social sciences and towards the aim of enabling someone to become a better human being and to live a richer life. And I don't think that it would be associated with vocational schools. I think there would be separate vocational schools. And I don't think, to go back to Lee's point, I don't think that it would be advocated for everybody.
Right.
A friend of mine said that when they were in high school, no one told them about trade schools. And that if they'd known about trade schools, they would have gone to trade schools. Why aren't we telling people, we put down trade schools? The only value is this one thing. And in my view, valuing every single possible contribution to society that a person makes as equally important, as equally valuable, giving everyone the respect that is their due, and broadening the range of educational possibilities that are suited to a person's skills and interests. When you do that, I think that what we're imagining is so far away from what we have now that I wouldn't call it the same thing. I think it's something entirely different.
I think that my answer would be somewhere in between your answers. First, I want to say, although it is, of course, true that the future of the university is not entirely up to us, it's also not entirely not up to us. I don't want to be so quick to say it's going to go where it's going and, I'm just going to stand on the sidelines and sort of watch it decay. I think that faculty can be more proactive. They should be more proactive. And I hope we don't get too fatalistic about the future of the university. I think the university is worth saving with major changes. Right. And the first and most important major change that I think has to be made to the university is that it has to stop being a sweatshop full of adjuncts.
Oh, for sure. Thank you.
It cannot operate on basically slave labor.
Yeah.
You can't have some of the students working at sub minimum wage, sub living wage levels. And some of the faculty are working at sub-living wage levels. And yet you have students, especially now with the new NIL portal, students who are making millions of dollars to play sports. That leads me to my second point, which is that universities have to be separated entirely from sports.
Yeah.
I mean, I love college sports. I'm a huge fan of college sports, but they have become basically the minor leagues.
Yeah.
The money involved in them, not just maintaining sports programs and stadiums and marketing and merch and all that, not just the money involved in them, but the pride of place that they take in the identity of the university has become truly House of Mirrors-like. I mean, just really strange. We've got to separate the success of sports programs from the mission of the university. Even in small schools, even in schools where their sports programs are just money pits, where they're just bleeding money, they still won't cut sports. It seems weirdly essential to the university. Now, that is not to say that there shouldn't be sports at universities, whether that's intramural leagues or whatever. And that's not to say they can't be televised and all that kind of stuff. But I think the NCAA is about as rotten as FIFA.
Yeah.
It's about as rotten as the mafia. The NCAA has way too much control over things that the NCAA should have no say about whatsoever. So first thing, we've got to de-adjunctify the universities. Second, we've got to emancipate them from their sports programs. And I suppose third, I think that, I mean, this is going to be hard to, of course, affect, but like we should make universities draft mission statements that actually say something, that aren't these kind of ChatGPT mission statements. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's worth saving. I also agree with both of your points. I think in saving it, we need to probably hype trade schools and VOTEC schools a little bit more. We need to readjust our message about who college is for. It's definitely not for everybody, but we need to understand what we are if we're going to save ourselves.
Those are nice points, Lee. I'm interested in how you de-adjunctify, because that's a very, very tricky thing.
Yeah.
I mean, at major universities, you could transition adjunct positions into regular faculty positions if you did away with the sports programs. I mean, that alone would pay for a lot of educational changes that need to be made.
But there's a reason why there's been an adjunctification, I think, in part, is because a lot of faculty want to get release time to work on their research And as a consequence, because they're not teaching, the teaching ends up getting done. They end up hiring adjunct faculty to do the teaching.
I completely disagree that that's the reason that we have this adjunctification problem.
I think it's part of it.
I mean, I think that it is a tiny, tiny sliver of the problem. I think the main problem is that it's cheap labor. And the universities don't want to spend their money on educators. They want to spend their money on everything except educators.
My university wants to fire all our adjuncts.
Well, let's see how that works out for them.
To go along with what Lee said, I have now started putting every cost that comes under discussion at DePaul in the currency of an associate provost. In other words, if they say, oh, you know what, we need to cut X% from your program, I'm like, okay, and how many associate provosts is that?
Yeah.
Because if they ask us to cut $30,000 out of our annual departmental budget, that's like a quarter associate provost, right? So
Off with his legs.
No, exactly.
start cutting those people. And I think then you could hire adjuncts as full-time tenure track faculty members.
No, I'm all for hiring adjuncts as full-time tenure track. I just don't think that's what they want.
No, it absolutely isn't. Yeah.
And I'm just not sure that transformation happens.
Well, you guys, unfortunately, our bartender is giving us the last call. She says that we're depressing her too much. And also, she's got some reports that she's got to write up for tomorrow's class.
Oh, man.
It looks like she might be the only one in the group project that actually does the work. So I have to give her a break. But this has been a really fascinating, if also deeply depressing conversation. And I thank you both for having it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Good night.